Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Show with Bill Hull and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Wait, I thought Bonhoeffer was dead. Who is Bill Hull? He doesn't sprechen Sie Deutsch, and he doesn't even like sauerkraut. Okay, this is Steve Simmons, and Bill paid me to say this. Bill Hull is tall, good-looking, well-dressed, and smells pretty good. He's written over 30 books. Not one of them is about Bonhoeffer. He went to Bonhoeffer's home in Berlin, and the woman in the front yard wouldn't let him in. He did lecture on Bonhoeffer at Oxford University. They eventually asked him who he was, and he was promptly thrown out. But ladies and gentlemen, and all the others listening to this podcast, here he is anyway. The husband of Jane, a father, a grandfather, Bill Hull.
Well, thank you, Steve Simmons. Always impressed with those golden chords. Good morning. We have a new episode today and a special guest and a new series on the Bonhoeffer Show. It's called Work Matters. And our guest today is Greg Brenneman, the author of Right Away and All at Once, 5 Steps to Transform Your Business and Enrich Your Life. Greg Brenneman is the full-time executive chairman of CCMP Capital, a large private equity firm. Mr. Brenneman plays an active role in executing the firm's overall strategy while remaining actively engaged in completing transactions and developing strategies. Greg has worked effectively as a leader on many boards. He has been the CEO of Burger King, good product. Continental Airlines, yeah, been on one of those when they existed. But most interestingly to me, he's a proud graduate of Washburn University in that metropolis of Topeka, Kansas. Yes. Long before Greg attended that fine university, I played basketball for an arch rival, Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A school, I might add, dedicated to the glory of God. Washburn University's mascot, interestingly enough, is an Ichabod. Now, anybody with biblical knowledge, and especially of Hebrew, knows that Ichabod was what was written over the door of the temple in Jerusalem, meaning the glory has departed. Or where is the glory? Now, why would a school choose such a name? I mean, their name used to be Lincoln College, named after our famous president, Abraham Lincoln. But in 1868, and this is the dirty stuff, ladies and gentlemen, the name was changed to Washburn University because they received a bequest of $25,000 from Ichabod Washburn and his estate. They sold out, it seems like, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm disappointed to tell you, for money, they sent the glory away. Now, just to prove my point, let me take you back to 1968. Dateline, Topeka, Kansas. It's the Cracker Box gym was packed that night. The students were stuffed in, and many were seated on the floor, and their feet were actually dangling into play. I know, because I tripped over a few of them. And they had signs. This place where the glory of God had departed, it said, while Oral Roberts prays, Washburn plays. I mean, these were big banners way up there, real high, very impressive looking. People had taken a lot of time for that. And then just as the game started, just before, they had a special cheer for us. And they said, somebody yelled, give me an H. And they had a big styrofoam H, and they threw it out on the floor. And then someone said, give me an E. And they threw that on the floor. And then they said, give me an A, and they threw that on the floor. Then finally an L. What's that spell? Heal, heal, heal. Well, I bowed my head and asked God to forgive and have mercy on these souls, Lord, because they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know about what we're going to do to them. But anyway, that game was televised, and we laughed and we asked, you know, in those days, hardly anybody televised basketball games, especially small college basketball games. And we said, well, where would it be televised? You know, there was no ESPN 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so I'm going to stop here and let Steve Simmons tell us a bit about how you can get involved in the Bonhoeffer Project. But then I'm going to come back and give Mr. Brenneman a chance to explain his conduct of going to that school where the glory had departed.
The Bonhoeffer Show is brought to you by the Bonhoeffer Project. As Bill said, the Bonhoeffer Project turns leaders into disciple makers. Jesus calls us as his disciples to make more disciples. But why should we make disciples? What are disciples? How does one make disciples? And who should join us? If you are interested in accomplishing what you agreed to do when you decided to follow Jesus, then inquire at thebonhoefferproject.com. You may qualify to become a member of one of our cohorts. The Bonhoeffer Project has cohorts spread across the U.S. and in several countries of the world. And remember to subscribe to The Bonhoeffer Show by going to the website, thebonhoefferproject.com. There you'll see the Bonhoeffer Show button. Click it and subscribe. Or go to iTunes, then type in The Bonhoeffer Show. And now, back to you, Bill.
Well, thank you again, Steve Simmons. And as Steve told you, we have cohorts beginning throughout this year, and you can go to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, and it will explain where those cohorts are. Essentially, where they are is online, but geography matters a lot less right now during this special season. And of course, it was great that we have been able to be online for a long time now, and it hasn't disrupted our cohorts. And we have a terrific faculty. And remember, we turn leaders into disciple makers. That's what we're all about. And so you can learn about that, and you can learn about some of the other things that we have going on. Well, it was a warm fall evening, and my guest, Greg Brenneman, myself, a mutual friend, Kyle Van, and his son, Kip, were walking down a street in Oklahoma City. We were going back to our hotel. We had just had a great meal at Mickey Mantle's restaurant in downtown Oklahoma City. And I was listening to Greg and Kyle talk about the client they had spoken with that day in Oklahoma City. Now, Oklahoma City has one really tall building. At least a few years ago when I was there, there was one really tall building that jets high into the sky and dwarfs all the other buildings in the skyline. It was kind of dark, and the top of the building was lit up in a bright color. It became clear that either Kyle or Greg had mentioned that they told the owner of the building they preferred a different light or color. So that was what they had been doing that day, is advising the owner of the Oklahoma City's tallest building. And I was wondering, who is this guy Greg that he hangs out with such an elite crew? Now, I read his book right away and all at once. Very helpful, a page turner. And so, Greg, congratulations on a great book.
Thanks, Bill. It was fun to write it. Unlike you, I'm one and done on the books, and so that'll be my one and only. But I really did enjoy putting it together.
Well, Greg, I know that you're a graduate of Washburn University, and more seriously, I'm sure it's a very fine school. I think you have an MBA from Harvard. Is that well?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a bit about what maybe are some of your most immediate observations about this COVID crisis and how life has changed for you, and maybe some observations you have. I would think it'd be worth taking a few minutes here just to find out what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Bill. First, I have to defend myself a little bit on my choice of school. So on mascots, I have the most unique mascots, high school and college, of probably anybody in the world, maybe. So my high school was Heston High School in Heston, Kansas, the middle of Kansas. And my great uncle started a company there that made farm equipment. So he invented the auger, he invented the machine that made the original hay bale. They used to have to take pitchforks and pitch hay on the back of trucks. And he made the machine that made those big round bales and the big square bales, mechanized things for the farmers. So the mascot of the high school I grew up in was a swather. It was a piece of farm equipment. They were the Heston Swathers, right? Then I go to college, and I picked Washburn because I thought I might want to go to law school. Then I had a revelation that would probably be too boring. And So I decided not to do that. It had the best law school in the Midwest, and I show up there, and it's the Washburn Ichabods, named after Ichabod Washburn. So a benefactor like John Harvard was a benefactor. But I will say one great thing about the school, I got really involved there, and I think we're all called, right, to be in places where, and to disciple people in places that are sometimes a little tougher. Certainly the business world is that way. It's why I wrote the book I wrote, to hopefully reach out to non-Christians as opposed to just Christians and be able to disciple them. But I did meet my wife, Rhonda, who we've been married for 36 years, in a Bible study at Washburn University. And she was assigned to me as my secret saint the Valentine's Day of our sophomore year. So for 3 weeks, she did stuff to me. And then on Valentine's Day, revealed who she was. We started dating and we got married. So out of the place of, of heathens, actually occasionally comes an interesting Christian story. So I think that's good. But no, in terms of this crisis, obviously the whole world has shut down for this. I think as we look back in history, we'll figure out whether that was right or wrong as we go back. But I've got a couple of interesting roles relative to the crisis. So I'm on the board. I'm the lead director of the Home Depot. I've been on the board for 20 years. I'm on the board of Baker Hughes, which is a leading energy services company. We have 8 portfolio companies that we own. But then I'm also vice chairman of the Baylor College of Medicine board, which was the epicenter for the world's largest medical center, which is in Houston, to respond to COVID. So we cleared all the hospitals out. I called my buddies at Home Depot, and we got all the N95 masks we needed. So we had PPE. The guys at Baker Hughes fired up their plastic printers and printed face shields and printed a little part so you could split one ventilator and use it for 2 people. So we built our capacity, and very fortunately, we down here have been in a situation where we've never used 10% of our beds or 5% of our ventilators. So we've been very lucky. The state, like most places, has been stay at home, stay in place, like you are, for a long time. Mm-hmm. That's eased up in the last week or two, and people are going back to work, and I think that's a good thing. Thomas Sowell, who is a Stanford sociologist and economics professor, had a saying, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs." And I think that describes COVID pretty well. At the same time, the initial models were predicting 2.4 million deaths in the U.S. without social distancing, 1.2 million with social distancing, and maybe we'll get to 100,000. So they were pretty far off. When we shut everything down, in our area in Houston, unfortunately, suicides are up about 700%, and domestic violence into the emergency room is up about 700%. And unemployment's going to top, I think 30 million U.S. citizens. Mm-hmm. And so it is a matter of kind of trade-offs and how we manage that and how we balance it. I think we're really fortunate to have 50 states, not one, that as different places are affected a little differently, we can respond a little differently. And for us in Texas, it's just really, truly time to get back to work. And we still have to manage the COVID and the issues associated with it, but we have hospital capacity to do that now. So I think people are ready with precaution to go back. We're seeing wholesale changes in the way business is being conducted, the way universities are being conducted, and I put together a little package on trends that are happening. And you don't hear anything about immigration anymore, hard borders. The supply chains that were once in China for medical equipment, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals coming back to the U.S. Big changes. The fact that you and I are having this interview over Zoom. Yeah. We wouldn't have imagined that, right? And as I talk to the CEOs of Delta and of places like Marriott, they expect when business travel comes back, it's only going to come back to about 80% of what it ever was, because the technology of this kind of interaction. I've already had meetings with somebody in Abu Dhabi this morning and with somebody in the UK virtually like this. And normally that would have been, a week or week and a half worth of flying around trying to see everybody. So fundamental changes. People are moving for the first time. This is very interesting. We track this at Home Depot because we have the Hertz rental trucks on our lots at Home Depot, and we rent them out of our tool rental center. people are moving for the first time in about 15 years from the city to the suburbs. So that if you're going to be at home, if you're going to live at home, and you want a place to work, you want a little bit of space to distance yourself. And we own the largest pool equipment company, a company called Hayward, that makes pumps and filters and heaters. And sales are through the roof because everybody that has kids at home, they're driving them crazy by now. If they can heat up their pool and throw the kids in the pool, it's a pretty good place to be. So it's really interesting the changes we're seeing economically and politically as a result of this virus. Some of those changes will stay permanently, and some of them are for the better. I've had dinner with my wife now every night for weeks and weeks. And she's probably tired of me, but what a pleasure that is, right? And we see the family more, and there's been some good things that have come out.
Yeah, my wife was talking to somebody on the phone the other day, and after 7 or 8 weeks or whatever it's been, she says, I'm just so desperate for human contact. And I was thinking, wait a minute. Am I human?
Yeah, exactly. No, well, I think both our wives would agree that they married us for better or worse, but not for lunch.
Yeah. Well, Greg, it's we could talk a lot of stuff. One of the things we could talk about is the church, and what I mean by that is the way we're doing church right now. And I've discovered that I just had a conference I was involved in. I was asked to be the keynoter, and I started off the conference, and they said, well, there'll be about 400 people there. Well, then the COVID crisis came. And we did the conference last week, and I spoke to 4,000 people online.
Yeah, it's amazing that you say that, Bill. I had the same experience. So I've been asked to speak a fair amount during this time on leadership through adversity. And, I've turned around a lot of companies, so I get calls for that kind of thing. And it's been fascinating. So I got on one call last week, and I was just watching the little ticker at the bottom of the call, and there were 5,000 people online watching, which is amazing. I think the audiences have expanded dramatically in terms of being able to reach people, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with church again, because obviously, especially the mega church, where you're going and you don't necessarily know a lot of people. My buddies, Kyle Vann and Bill Nath and Hal Chappelle and I, for the last 14 years, have gotten together every Sunday before church. Right. To sort of do a Bible study and share our lives together. We've continued that during this crisis. So we've all socially distanced, but not from each other. We sit 6 feet apart, but we're together every Sunday morning. And we've extended our time because we don't have the back end, need to go to church, or the desire, or it's not open. So it'll be really interesting to see. And I think the project that you're doing here with discipleship and off of Bonhoeffer's life is so appropriate for these times, because I think real life change happens in much smaller groups than a group of thousands sitting on Sunday morning. I'm not denigrating that. I'm just saying life change happens more one-on-one, or one on a few, as opposed to one on many. And I think you are there for a moment such as this.
Well, thank you. I guess we should get on with your story. How did a boy from a small Kansas town end up writing this book? Because you've got your 10,000 reps or 10,000 hours in a number of areas. So tell us a bit about your background, why you're the person you are today.
Yeah, I've had some amazing mentors in my life along the way. So I grew up in a small Kansas farm town, as I mentioned. Probably my first two mentors are still very fundamental to me. One was my great uncle, who was an entrepreneur and inventor, started a Fortune 500 company. The other mentor I have, I still talk to frequently. He's 95 years old. He was one of the leading preachers and artists in the Mennonite church. I grew up Mennonite, so I have Amish relatives. And he makes the most amazing pottery. In fact, on my desk here, I have a piece of his sculpture, and I have several at home. And he's 95. I still talk to him. His name's Paul Friesen. So I had these kind of amazing mentors early on, but I had this desire to go do, something more. So that took me to Washburn, took me to Harvard Business School. And from there, I went to Bain. And I was fortunate early in my career at Bain to, with two other guys, open an office in Dallas when Mitt Romney was running Bain. So Mitt looked at me and he said, Greg, always remember, in every interaction you have with somebody, you either gain or lose share. There's no neutral interaction. And so I got these great pieces of wisdom, as I did that. And really quickly, I made partner at Bain, which is a consulting firm. I started doing corporate turnarounds of a number of different companies. And Continental Airlines was a client, now merged into United. And it was failing. And so they asked me to come on at 32 years old as president of Continental. And we put in place this one-page plan called the Go Forward Plan, a kind of one-page plan idea I'd come up with at Bain to turn companies, where you take out a single sheet of paper and you write market, financial, product, and people. So Fly to Win was our market plan, Fund the Future. Our financial plan, Make Reliability a Reality, was our product plan. And Working Together was our people plan. And then on that, just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things, no more than that, underneath each of those. So just an example, on the market side, I said, we ought to fly places people want to go, right? 18% of our flying was cash flow negative. There weren't enough customers for the flights. And so we shut down a whole bunch of routes and what they call regauge the airline, got the right size airplane on the right routes and all. And, over that time, we actually became profitable. We'd lost $770 million the first year. I got there in November that year. And by the time we were in year 3, we were making $660 million a year. And the stock had gone from $6 to $120. So it was very successful. Nice. Off of that came an HBR article that became one of the best sellers at HBR. People are still using it this year for this crisis. It's called Right Away and All at Once, How We Saved Continental Airlines. And it had these steps in it. And after that article came out and became a bestseller, I got asked a lot about, would you write a book? Would you write a book? And a book to me always felt like a resume virtue, not a eulogy virtue. David Brooks in The Road to Character talks about resume virtues are, how they introduce you, what you did for me. You did a great job on that, by the way. I usually have my mother do that, but I'll switch. And eulogy virtues are things you want written, on your said at your funeral or written on your tombstone. And writing a book felt like a resume virtue. And finally, somebody approached me after I'd done a number of these turnarounds and said, hey, Greg, what if we gave you editorial license to write whatever you wanted to write? Would you write a book in that manner? And I said, I'll only write a book if I can actually talk about business and life, because the only real thing that would be valuable to me is actually using that book to impact people's lives. And they said, well, we'd like you to write 2 books. We'd like you to first write the business book and second write the life book. And I said, that second book will never get written. I knew they wanted the business content. Mm-hmm. So I said, no, I'm not willing to do that. So they came back and said, fine, you can do that. And that's what generated the book. So every other chapter is the 5 steps going in your business and then how it applies to your life. And that interrelated nature of integrating faith and work is kind of the whole purpose of the book.
Yeah, you had the 5 steps. Have a plan and track your progress. Build a fortress balance sheet. Think money in, not money out. Build a team and let the inmates run the asylum.
Yep.
Do you have a story about how you took somebody through that process?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll contrast the business and life piece of that, because I think the contrast is really important. So have a plan and track your progress was, I really do believe taking complex things and making them simple are the way you get things done. And so having a 1-page plan to run a business, and I gave you a little bit of an example there at Continental, but I did that for Burger King. We still do that for all the portfolio companies we have, just to set up what are the key things we want to get done, in a business. For example, Make Reliability a Reality became, in the airline business, was get people to their destination on time with their underwear, serve them good food when they're hungry, show them movies when they're bored, right?
Yeah.
It sounds easy, but doing that 2,500 times a day with weather and everything, we got good at it. We became the best airline in America 7 years in a row, rated by J.D. Power. At Burger King, it became the product became an ops platform. So it was fast and friendly, hot and fresh, and clean and safe, right? So we put metrics underneath each of those to make sure that if a Whopper was supposed to be 160 degrees, we took out all the heat shoots, because every time a Whopper sat on a heat shoot for more than a minute, every minute it would lose 10 degrees of temperature. And after 5 minutes, it'd be 110 degrees. It wasn't the same product. So it was that kind of business thinking, simple business thinking, across these businesses that really made a huge difference. So I got to be about 45 years old, and I asked myself, I wonder if I can write a plan to turn around businesses, if I can write a plan to turn around me. Yeah. Because I'd been successful. I at 32 ran Continental, and that became a very famous business success story. Did the same at Burger King and at PwC Consultant. But I felt like the church in Laodicea. I was neither hot nor cold. I was kind of lukewarm. And I thought and I had some great mentors, Christian mentors that, like my great uncle and Paul Friesen, who was my 7th grade Sunday school teacher, great artist and preacher, that I watched their lives and I said, I really wanted to go all out like them. So I took out a piece of paper and I said, what would be meaningful to me? What are my blue chips? This goes to poker now. So you blue chips are $25, red chips are $10, white chips are $1. And, what are the things that are important to me? So the first thing is I wrote, I want to become an intimate of God's, right? A.W. Tozier, the famous theologian, has a statement: God doesn't have favorites, but he does have intimates. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote down the 4 or 5 things I thought it would be necessary to become an intimate of God's. And that's how I got to be in the small group with Bill and Kyle and Hal. We kind of put that together as an accountability group as a key component of that. So I built out my life plan the same way. And then the second step is build a fortress balance sheet. Right now, that's a critical item. I'm going to tell you a really great story from right now at Home Depot. So we were in March asking the question, the CEO of Home Depot and I, Craig Manier, what would we need? What would Home Depot need? And Craig had been talking to this with Richard Maffei, his CFO. If we were to get shut down for 60 days, that didn't happen, but at the time it seemed like it might. Mm-hmm. What would we need to take care of our people so we could pay all of our associates? How much cash would we need? And we did a simple, quick calculation. We said we got $3 billion of cash on the balance sheet, but we need $11 billion. So by the time you went through, the stores are shut down, you want to pay the people, you're going to have some online sales, backed it all out, it was $11 billion. So we went actually out and we got JP Morgan to give us a $5 billion line of credit to back up our Tier 1 commercial paper program. And then the bond market was completely closed. The markets were completely shut down. And we said, Home Depot can open the market. We're big enough, we're well known enough. So we did. And within 2 hours, we went out for $3 billion. We had $27 billion worth of demand. So we took $5 billion at an all-in interest rate of 3%. And if you do the math, 3 plus 5, now plus another 5, we had $13 billion all of a sudden. So we knew we could actually get shut down and take care of our people. That's called having a fortress balance sheet. So you can actually take care of your people even in the worst of times. So we try and prepare that way in business. Mm-hmm. In life, it's actually, I call it choose freedom. Because if you want to execute your life plan to become an intimate of God's, in my place, it was to be able to spend time with people I really care about, my parents, my family, my kids, be able to mentor young people, be able to do mentoring. Rhonda and I have been doing a marriage retreat for, 13 years now. We'll miss it this year because of COVID, but it'll be the first year. But anyway, all of those things, you need to have your financial balance sheet in your personal life set up so that, the banks don't get in the way of you doing what's really important and what God really wants you to do. So that means to me, I don't have any debt. It means, being very careful about what you borrow and how you live your life so that you can be very generous with your time and with your resources. And then the third point was think money in, not money out. In business, and I'll give you another really great example from now. We have a company called Founder Sport Group that makes uniforms for sports. I mean, you would appreciate that, like what you have on that here now, Bill. Yeah. So kids playing soccer, basketball, football, baseball, they make all those uniforms. Well, with no sports going on, YMCA, high school, college, there's no uniforms being sold, right? So their sales dropped to 10% of what they were right away in the end of March. So we wanted to keep them essential and keep them producing stuff. So we switched over and we started making, I've got one here I'm gonna grab. We started making masks.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So we made branded face masks. So that's just an idea of thinking, you can cut all the costs, which we did, but how do you generate revenue? How do you do something, that will bring people back and keep companies alive? In the healthcare space, we own a company called ERC, Eating Recovery Center, that the leading provider by 10 times to treat anorexia or nervosa. And we actually pivoted on the outpatient side from in-person therapy to telehealth in 2 weeks, right? So big pivots.
2 weeks, wow.
In business. So that's think money in, not money out. In life, it's the opposite. In your personal life, it's think money out, not money in. Generosity is the only cure for materialism. So there are 13 major worldviews: Christianity, Judaism, atheism, agnostic, the Enlightenment movement with Immanuel Kant. The only thing they all agree on is that you ought to give alms to the poor. So how do you live your life in terms of your personal life plan, in terms of how you set up your finances, so that you can be extraordinarily generous to those in need? And that was kind of the third point. The fourth point in business was build a team. And never has that been more important in this moment of time. So you really find out in these crises who can really deliver, and who do you want in the foxhole with you and who don't you. A good Christian friend of mine has climbed Everest, said there was one Christian in his group of about 8 climbing Everest at base camp, and there were 5 Christians at Camp 4. So it gives you a kind of, It's tough times actually open up these huge harvests. I was talking to Tim Keller the other day. We were just comparing notes, a pastor from New York and a good friend of mine. And we were comparing notes about 9/11. And Tim said their church, Redeemer, went from 2,700 members to 5,400 members overnight, 1 week to the next. And their revenue went down 25%. Because a lot of the new members, weren't giving, and everybody had been impacted. And the same thing happened in 08, 09 in the financial crisis. But the harvest of souls for the Lord, the opportunity to disciple people, has never been bigger. And that's really true here. So on the business side, build a team is have that team around you, and then communicate super frequently with them. Make sure you're executing. So in our business, we have a call at 8 a.m. every morning with my consumer team, 11 a.m. at 9 a.m. with the industrial team. And then I'm talking to either investors or our CEOs all day long till, into the night. So this is a time for really having teams and being able to execute. In life, it's the same thing. So Jesus did an interesting thing in his life. He had the 4 that were the closest to him. He had the 12 disciples, he had the 72, and then he had the masses. And I often think our life should be very similar to his life, where we have these people that we're very intimate with, we see every day or we talk to very frequently, that we really truly live life with. Another larger group of friends, right? And then a group of the masses. And I said, you cannot apply this to your in-laws, but we all have in our lives a Winnie the Pooh, the Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh, just always down in the dumps, and people that take an enormous amount of energy for which we probably don't get a lot out of them, and they don't get a lot out of us. And what I've encouraged people to do is, if you have an Eeyore in your life, again, it can't be your relative, because you got to live with that. You don't have to get rid of them as a friend, but maybe you just move them out one circle. Instead of dealing with them every day, you deal with them once a week or once a month. But you need to build that core group of people around you, like I have with Bill and Kyle and Hal, that really holds you accountable. And then the last thing was let the inmates run the asylum. And that, I'll give you another continental example. So that was really turning the airline over to the employees. So we set up we told them the plan. We built our fortress balance sheet. We were about out of cash. We turned all that around. We restructured it all. We actually thought about how to deliver a great product by getting people to their destinations on time with their underwear, good food when they're hungry, movies when they're bored, cleaned up all the planes. We built a really great management team. I had to let go of, I had 60 officers when I got there. We had to let go of 40 of them. We brought in 20 people that really knew what they were doing. And so we had all that in place. And then it was a matter of saying to the captains on the airline, this is your airline. So if you see any problem on the system and you're an employee, there's a 1-800 number you can call, and we'll get back to you in 24 hours with, we fixed it, we're not going to fix it, and here's why, or it's going to take us a little bit to take a look at it, and we'll get back to you with a date, we'll get back to you. And we had an ops meeting every morning to fix everything that was wrong on the airline. And after 2 or 3 years of doing that, we'd pretty much fixed most of the things that were wrong on the airline. It was very, very effective. And we then turned it over to them and told the captains, when you got your plane full, you're ready to go, it's your call. Where you don't have to, call back to system control and, check with headquarters to see. So we really put a lot of empowerment in the hands of the employees. And in your life, it's really focusing on those legacy virtues, not eulogy virtues. One of my favorite stories is Frank Blake, who was the CEO of Home Depot before Craig was. I call him in the office on Sunday afternoon every Sunday, and he sat in the office and wrote 100 thank you notes every Sunday, handwritten thank you notes to somebody that had done something, extraordinary. And these were posted all over the company. But more than that, when I would go meet with CEOs, I would tell them the story of Frank's thank you notes because they were just so meaningful. People rarely take time to write out and say thank you. And several of the CEOs actually opened their desk drawer and showed the thank you notes. We all have a desk drawer that looks like the one I'm opening with notes people send us. The reason we do is it's so rare when we get, when people do that it's very powerful. So it's really actually making sure you say you're grateful of what you do. So those are the 5 steps. And
I have one right here from a church planting network. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. We all keep those because we don't get that many of them relative to the number of conversations we have.
Well, Greg, I tell you, this is so rich. We could go on for a long time, but we're going to take a break now, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to give you a lightning round, and then we'll be done. But let's hear more from Steve Simmons about how you can become part of the Bonhoeffer Project.
If you want to go deeper into Bill's and the Bonhoeffer's teachings, go to www.thebonhoefferproject.com. There you'll find videos, books, and other resources that present both the problem and the solution to the disciple-making challenge facing today's Christian community. You can join a cohort or read Bill's and other Bonhoeffer Project team members' blogs and connect to Bill's books and articles. Remember to subscribe to The Bonhoeffer Show. Go to iTunes and do it today. We need to hear from you so Bill can answer your questions. All of Bill's answers are guaranteed to make you better looking, lose 10 pounds, and the IRS to write you a very big refund check. Well, not really, but you get the idea. Now, back to the King of Culture for critical analysis of whatever crosses his mind. Take it away, Bill.
Well, thank you, Steve. We know that we have a few webinars coming up. You check on our website for that. They're free, and it's for Christian leaders or for leaders of any ilk. And we look forward to talking to you about some of the pressing issues we have right now. Okay, now we're back with Greg Brenneman, and we want to talk about what we call the lightning round, and we'll just find out a little bit more about Greg before we let him go. The first is, Greg, what is the best movie you've ever seen or your favorite movie?
Hacksaw Ridge.
Hacksaw Ridge. Okay, that was with Mel Gibson, wasn't it?
No, that was with, I'm trying to remember who the actor was. It was actually a story of a Jehovah's Witness in World War II. That was a conscientious objector and saved.
He was a medic. Right.
A medic, yeah. And another great uncle of mine was a World War II medic, a Mennonite, conscientious objector, but served in a very similar capacity. So that movie's always stuck with me as just an iconic Christian movie.
All right. So favorite book, but the Bible doesn't count.
God, I have so many favorite books. I'm going to say same kind of different as me. And that's a story about a homeless man and a wealthy man that actually bonded through their joint faith. It's a fantastic true story out of Fort Worth, Texas.
All right. Jesus doesn't count in this next question, but who's your who do you think would be the greatest leader or your favorite leader?
Oh man, that's there's so many of the folks I know that I know personally. I'll start there. I'd have to go with 41, George H.W. Bush, who was a dear friend, had passed last year. But he was that greatest generation, that World War II generation, was really special. And just the way, the kindness and thoughtfulness and overall leadership he provided, I think, will historically go down as just one of the kindest, most thoughtful men I've ever met.
Yeah, I've heard many good things about him. Who mentors you now?
I've got several people that actually kind of speak into my life. So Paul Friesen is still alive at 95, who I talked to, and Paul's amazing. I think he's read 36 or 37 books this year already. He's writing his life story. He's still creating, art. He has huge passages of scripture memorized and can quote them. He's always studying scripture. He's just a great guide. And then I think some of the others, the founders of Home Depot. So they're all alive. Bernie turned 90 this year, Marcus. Ken Langone of NYU Langone Medical Center. Bernie started the Atlanta Aquarium, the Marcus Center for Autism. And Arthur Blank is the owner of the Atlanta Falcons. They're so kind and generous and thoughtful and giving of their time, energy, and resources. I've learned a lot from watching those guys live their lives. They've lived them extraordinarily well.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for taking time. I know that you have some board meetings coming up in a few minutes and some other things you're doing today, of course. But thank you for giving us this time and sharing your wisdom with us and your life in Christ. And we appreciate it so much. And I know that many people are going to be helped when they hear this podcast.
Thank you, Bill. It's been great to be here with you.
Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, follow Jesus, and he will teach you everything you'll ever need to know.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoeffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.